former NBA writer, now national football writer for today's pigskin.com. And, of course, covers the Eagles for 97.3 ESPN.com. John, welcome back, pal. Are you 85%?
Well, I told Josh, and most people are day-to-day. I'm minute-to-minute when it comes to the boys. So, but physically, I feel great. It's just a voice issue and sort of the mucus from the bronchitis. I don't want to sick everybody out, but that's basically what I'm dealing with.
All right. Well, playing hurt at the NovaCare Center. We know Sam Bradford. We signed his deal. We know the story. He didn't envision any situation where he wouldn't be the starter once he came back. We know that Doug Peterson kind of said, hey, he's the starter. Howie Roseman kind of echoed that. But today, Frank Reich, for the second time, noted that while he is currently the top guy on the depth chart, I think Frank Reich has kind of gone out of his way to suggest that nothing is guaranteed in this race for the quarterback spot.
Yeah, I think Frank is kind of in off-season mode, as I describe it. And when you think about the off-season in the NFL, it's all about competition. So I think that's what he's trying to foster and saying, look, all 90 people assembled here have an opportunity. And that's great to say, but it's really not realistic. So I think it's more of that take he has on it. And he doesn't want Sam to feel entitled. But we've heard it again and again from the head coach and the general manager that their plan is to have Sam Bradford start the season as the quarterback. And if things go well, the plan is to redshirt Carson Wentz. The problem with that comes in what happens if things don't go well, and that's where the curveball comes. But I think Frank, as I said, is more in line with the off-season mentality. And Jim Schwartz kind of said it also when he talked about Carson Wentz. He's like, don't prejudge things. This is the off-season. This is about competition. I think that's the way they're attacking things.
Yeah, he said, by the way, for those of you who did not hear it, he said, I said there's order, and the order is Sam number 1, Chase is number 2, and Carson is number 3. But you compete every day at practice. That's the same. Jason Peters is the number 1 left tackle, and so on and so forth. And it's the same at every position. I would never change that. Sam's number 1, Chase is number 2, Carson is number 3, and you compete every day. And, I guess that's the mentality that you should be hearing, which is different from the mentality that we hear from the head coach, John. I mean, the head coach seems to be handing guys jobs.
Well, I think the head coach has to be a little more realistic and has to deal with the media more. And obviously, when you talk about things, similar when Jalen Mills was lined up in the first team last week, and we all asked Jim Schwartz about it, and he said, don't read too much into it. But you can read into it, and that's the fact that the defensive coordinator likes the skill set of that particular player and wanted to see him against better players. So it does mean something. And the failure to acknowledge that is easier to do when you're a coordinator or a position coach. But if you're the head coach, you got to look at the landscape, and the landscape is you always have people asking, what's the plan moving forward, and that's what Doug has to deal with. So it's a different job, and it's a different mindset.
John McMullen's with us. John, yesterday, we didn't get a chance to really talk about this a whole heck of a lot. Jeff Lurie, MMQB, suggested to them that the current quarterback structure was planned to be this way. To me, that sounds a little bit disingenuous. I mean, they couldn't have...
A little bit.
All right, a lot of it. And they couldn't have known they were going to get the number 2 pick in the draft. To suggest that this was the way they wanted to do things just sounds ridiculous.
It does, and you hit the nail on the head. I mean, there's no way you can assume that you're going to get up from number 13 to number 2 overall. I think people forget about that, and they say, well, they jumped up from number 8. They had to jump up from number 13 first. So it was a very unlikely scenario. So to go in with that as your plan, I'll tell you what, if you did do that, that's a crazy plan because the odds were against Carson Wentz being here at all, and certainly things shifted once they were able to get him. And you see that by the reaction to Sam Bradford. And, by the way, I don't think Chase Daniel's all that happy, because I thought he came in while there was a clear demarcation line and Sam was going to be the starter. I thought you had a wink-wink there with Doug Peterson and Chase Daniel that said, look, if Sam doesn't pick up this offense, even you might get a chance to be the starter. That's not the case for either of them, at least long term.
Yeah.
So for Jeffrey to say that is silly, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it's really weird. I mean, I get the point of it, but the point of it sounds like hindsight. You know what I mean? Like, he made a comment that was in hindsight, that they had that view before it actually happened, and that seems to be out of place.
Well, they might have had the discussion. Look, if we're able to get Carson Wentz, this is the plan. I mean, I guess that's possible, that you throw it around in the draft meetings and say, pie-in-the-sky stuff, if we're able to pull this off, this is how we have to move forward with what we already have in the building. That part of it I could buy. But to assume that was the plan from step one, from point A all the way to point Z, that that's incredulous, and not nobody's going to believe that.
Yeah, I mean, they simply signed Bradford and Daniel when they had the 13th pick. At that time, they don't know they're trading up number 2. So I don't know. It just sounds a little bit out of place by the Eagles owner. John McMullen is with us, and I want to get your take. There was a report. I don't know if it was a report. It doesn't sound like a report to me. It sounds like just, hey, by the way, Wentz seems to have a little bit more grasp of the playbook at this point. I can't imagine that at this stage of the game that is noticeable, that one guy looks like he knows the playbook more than another. So, again, I'm not trying to criticize the reporting. I think that people are taking something out of context a little bit. Is that how you feel about the people who have said Wentz seems to be picking up the playbook faster?
Yeah, not only that, I actually talked to the reporter who reported that. I put that in quotations because he was taken out of context completely, and that's not what he was trying to say. He just said that Carson kind of projects as better with his skill set and knowledge in this particular offense. So I think other outlets took what he wrote, kind of misconstrued it, and said Carson was ahead, and that's, as you pointed out, that's ridiculous to say after 2 open OTA practices, and even the reporter who wrote it acknowledged that to me. So I just thought that was other people sort of, for lack of a better term, sort of clickbait, trying to run with something.
It sounded that way, and I know Matt, too, and I feel that it seems a little disingenuous on that part for anybody to suggest that he's reporting that one guy knows the playbook better at this stage of the game. I just think that that's unfair because but I will say this, because yesterday it seemed like, a lot of players have been critical of the offense. It was very simplistic, and I think Sam Bradford said, we ran the same plays over and over, and the playbook's very big. Jordan Matthews really said there's a lot of major differences between the offenses. So they're learning the offense now. It's not to say that they're not, but to suggest that one guy knows more of the offense at this point than another, I think it would be a little would be odd, right?
Yeah, and that's not what Matt tried to do. But you can say it about one guy, but that one guy's Chase Daniel, because he's been in it for 3 or 4 years, and he certainly knows the offense and is ahead of both Sam Bradford and Carson Wentz. But that's expected. That's just being in that particular offense. And you're right, this is vastly different from Chip Kelly, and everybody said that, from the quarterbacks to the wide receivers to the tight ends, you name it. I mean, this is a legitimate NFL playbook that is basically War and Peace sized compared to running the same 7 to 10 plays over and over again. And Sam kind of talked about that. He said, we ran such a limited number of plays under Chip Kelly, we can run them again and again and again. There's so many plays in this offense, you might only get to practice it once a week and not get back to it to the next week.
Wow.
And that's more of a traditional West Coast offense with the deep formations and all that kind of stuff. You can argue which is better, and I will just say that the players are excited to be in a more traditional NFL offense.
I know John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, at JF McMullen on Twitter. The Eagles' lack of depth at linebacker has something we've discussed. Jordan Hicks, who has a lot of injury problems. Michael Kendricks has had some injury issues himself. Even newcomer Nigel Bradham has missed games. Those three guys missed 15 games combined last year, so depth is a little bit of an issue at that spot. I don't know that we know too much about the guys behind them. Last year, all the talk was, well, look at all the linebackers they got on this team. A lot different story this time around.
Yeah, and I think other than Najee Good, who is sort of cross-training, playing a lot of middle linebacker, but he can also play on the outside. He's and there goes the voice, minute to minute. But he's a veteran guy who understands both positions, and I think they feel comfortable with him. But other than that, Mike, it is slim pickings. I mean, you have Joe Walker, a seventh-round pick, Deontay Skinner, who doesn't have much NFL experience. So as far as depth at linebacker, when we get into August, that's a position you're going to have to look at late and say maybe on the final cut down they'll add somebody from outside the organization because there's just not a lot of people here.
Yeah, when you hear about guys like Quentin Gause and Ty Powell, you mentioned Deontay Skinner, Mike Tavares. These are guys that virtually nobody in the football world knows too much about, but right now they would be pressed into action if the Eagles had an injury to the linebacker spot. John McMullen's with us. Another interesting storyline, not just Eagle-related, but NFL-related, is Walter Thurmond, who announced he will retire. Why maybe it's not a surprise. I wanted to get your perspective in terms of talking to Walter, being around Walter. Did he come off as the kind of guy that just didn't love playing? He's 28 years old, excelled last year, 71 tackles, 3 interceptions, 2 sacks, 2 forced fumbles. He sounds like a guy that teams, would have been going after, and he walks away, and we keep seeing this trend. Just your dealings with Walter, and did he come off as the kind of guy that just didn't have a passion to play, or, do you think this has to do with the concussion stuff? He just said, you know what, I made my money, I'm out, I have other interests. What is your take on Thurmond walking away from the game?
Well, I think it's a layered decision. I don't know if he wasn't passionate about football, but what he did have is other interests. He's very interested in filmmaking, for instance. Grew up in Hollywood, has already sort of set up a documentary on the OJ, so he's very interested in that. He's very interested in music, art, and things like that. So he does have varied interests, and he certainly, if you follow him on Twitter and you see his Twitter account, he's tweeted often about safety-related things involving concussions, so that's part of it. As far as the money, he signed a make-good deal, Mike, and as you mentioned, he made good. And all of a sudden, he's playing for $3.3 million, and all he can get is a $700,000 raise. And I think he said to himself, you know what, I'm not going to play for a discount. Either pay me what I'm worth or I'm going to do other things that I like.
John, Brandon Graham working with the second team, Connor Barwin, Vinny Curry, that's an area that I think is very intriguing because as we've kind of chronicled, Graham and Barwin are going back to former positions. Graham, a little bit more experience at the end, and Barwin played there a while back there. Curry, who they tried to make a linebacker, they put him back on the end last year. It seems like they've got good depth there, but how do you see at this stage, I don't know if you can get any indication or feel of how that rotation will work, who will get the most of the time? Will they just try to rotate those three guys and keep them fresh?
Well, I think you're right. They're going to try to rotate those three guys. And now that we've gotten a little bit into it, they've started to move Brandon Graham over to the left side, give him some looks over there so he feels comfortable playing either right or left end. And I think it's going to be Connor to start at right end, Vinny Curry to start at left end, and sort of Brandon Graham mixing in from there. One thing Jim Schwartz has always done is had this rotation system to keep everybody fresh. and that's his mentality, and he wants that inside also, and that's where Mike Martin comes into effect, because they need somebody to sort of spell Fletcher Cox when he gets here and Benny Logan inside. So while they look very stout up front in the front four as far as the starters go, they need to develop those reserves to run what Jim wants to run, especially in the fourth quarter when he wants those pass rushers fresh. If you're in the lead and you got to get to the quarterback late. So right now it's shaping up as Barwin and Curry as the starters and Brandon Graham mixing in. That's a little bit of a surprise to me, because I thought Brandon would be the starter and sort of Connor would mix in. But either or, all three are going to get plenty of repetitions during the season if they're healthy.
John McMullen with us at JF McMullen on Twitter. John also covers the league nationally for today's pigskin.com. And, John, there are some national things to touch on here. You also have a piece up over at today's Pigskin about Kirk Cousins and the planning for their season down in Washington. And I think, Cousins in this Redskins team is kind of an interesting storyline, because it still seems that everybody is kind of talking about them as they are the number 4 team in that NFC East. I don't know that old habits die hard or people just don't buy into this team. What is your take on the Cousins-led Washington Redskins?
Well, it's weird to me because, I mean, they are the NFC East champions, and granted, it wasn't a very good division, and I kind of understand people assuming Dallas would take a big step up because of the injuries to Tony Romo, Des Bryant. If they're healthy, to me, they do shape up as the class of this division. But once you get past the Cowboys, to me, it's the Redskins. And if anything, they've gotten better from last year. And you figure Kirk Cousins, as I wrote about at today's Pigskin, he's not the type of guy who's going to rest on his laurels. He's defined by his preparation. So I don't think there's going to be a big difference from him making $770,000 to $20 million. I think you're going to still see the same guy who watches all the extra film, prepares as much as humanly possible. And then you talk about guys like Jordan Reed and Deshaun Jackson and all the talent they have at the skill position. I think the Redskins are better than people give them credit for.
Yeah, I'm interested. They added Norman to that team on a defense. And obviously he was just in the Super Bowl and as a very big part of that defense. But as you kind of write about Kirk Cousins, and he is really the key. We'll see if he can follow up that year. I want to get your take on Nick Foles. I don't know, is Tom Condon his agent or something? All of a sudden, he has decided, a couple of weeks into OTAs now that, hey, you know what? I'm boycotting because you drafted Jared Goff. Did he not just see a failed experiment in Philadelphia, his old team?
Yeah,
what do you make of this?
It's so interesting because these two can't get away from each other, Sam Bradford and Nick Foles, the comparisons. And the Rams have actually just opened up their on-field OTA, so they're the last team. So basically Nick Foles hasn't been back in the building since the Rams drafted Jared Goff. And in that case, it's kind of silly because he's the third-team quarterback. So there's not like he has any reason not to show up or try to force a trade, because at this stage of the game, when off-season rosters are filled, nobody has any interest in making trades. Now, maybe they can revisit things in August when injuries start to pile up and people look at younger quarterbacks and say, this guy's maybe not all that we cracked him up to be, and possibly Nick could be traded for maybe a 7th-round pick, conditional, and the Rams would be happy to do that. And I think they're going to hold out for that, because the reality is anybody who's ever covered Nick Foles, and he was here for so long, he's not going to miss voluntary work. He's going to show up. He's not going to be a bad guy in the locker room. It's just a strategy that he's attempting, and really there is no prudent strategy when you're a third-string quarterback. I mean, there's nothing. You have no leverage, and basically he's just getting a few extra vacation days by missing the voluntary work. But certainly it doesn't make him look good. It's not going to be a a sliding scale. We criticize Sam Bradford. You should criticize Nick Foles. I mean, it's kind of silly what he's trying to do.
Yeah, he seems like, I mean, he didn't even end the year as the starter down there. It doesn't seem it doesn't seem like he has less of a leg to stand on than Sam does by far. I mean, Sam was the starter. Wow. Sam signed a contract. Foles wasn't even starting at the end of the year.
Yeah, I think that the part that confused me with Sam is Sam had a reason to be here. Like, Nick doesn't have a reason because he can't play. If Jared Goff gets injured, then it's Case Keenum. He's not going to play, where Sam is going to have an opportunity to be the starter of this team. And as a football player, my mentality would be, look, the only way I can continue to be a starter, not only from 2016 but also 2017 and beyond, is to perform well and prove to other organizations that I can continue to be a starter. So I think that was the confusing part, at least for me, when it came to Sam. Nick doesn't even have that option because he has no chance to get on the field in Los Angeles. And I imagine at some point the Rams might even visit cutting him. They already paid him a $6 million roster bonus. But he's got another, I think, just under $2 million guaranteed in base salary. That's a lot to pay for a third-string quarterback that's not going to get on the field unless there's an emergency.
Yeah. Last one for John and Fitzpatrick. Some talk, some money, no closer.
Well, I think Ryan is frustrated, and I think as it continues to go on, it might start to turn into that Carson Palmer sort of pseudo-retirement route for him. And the fact that it's obvious the Jets are going to lowball him. They're not going to go much higher. If you look at the contract they offered, it's basically Chase Daniel money after the first year. And if you look at it with veteran quarterbacks, only Tyrod Taylor makes less. So it was kind of a slap in the face, and that's how he took it. But he doesn't have any other options. So the only path forward to get out and play with someone else other than the Jets is to do what Palmer did, and that's wait for an injury, and maybe somebody comes calling at that point. Otherwise, it's retirement or play for the low ball offers. Basically, three choices, and Ryan's still kind of weighing them.
Actually, I would have slipped one more in for you. I know you're playing hurt here, but the NFL will move the Pro Bowl back to Orlando. Not back to Orlando. We'll go to Orlando in 2017, but the, I guess, biggest news is that the AFC, NFC is coming back, and we all say, not that anybody cares, but people do watch that game. The ratings are there to suggest it, and that's why that game is still on television. But at least it is going back to some semblance of a football game and not a fantasy football game.
Yeah, and you'll see the ratings will go back up, even though it's not a very good game. People can understand the AFC, NFC format. And they called it in the press release a reimagining of the Pro Bowl. It's really not a reimagining, just going back to the status quo and obviously changing the city in Orlando, which is a big tourist hub, and possibly that could generate interest. But as far as the reimagining part, if you didn't imagine something hideous in the first place, you wouldn't have to reimagine. And that fantasy football for real nonsense was just awful.
Horrible.
Worse than my voice.
Well, we appreciate you playing hurt. Good insight as well. Check him out for all your national NFL coverage over at todayspigskin.com. And, of course, for all your Eagles stuff at 97.3 ESPN.com. All right, John, take care, pal.
Hey, thanks, Mike.